The mansion had always smelled of money, but tonight it smelled of something else. Old grief, cold marble, and the ghost of a song no one had sung in 6 years. Elena Marchetti dragged her mop bucket across the polished floor of the Colombo estate's east wing, her cheap sneakers squeaking softly against imported Carrara stone that cost more per square foot than she made in a month. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in late November, and the 42-room Italianate mansion in Oyster Bay was as silent as a cathedral after the last mourner has left. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. Everyone except her. That was the arrangement now. That was the punishment. At 27 years old, Elena stood 5 feet 6 inches tall and wore a size 16 uniform that the estate's laundress had quietly let out an extra inch at the shoulders without telling anyone. Her hair, the color of wet chestnut bark, was pulled into a heavy bun at the nape of her neck. Her hands were red and cracked from bleach. Her eyes, a dark, liquid brown that had once made a Juilliard vocal coach compare them to a Caravaggio painting, were rimmed with the exhaustion of a woman who had not slept more than 5 hours in 3 years. She looked, to anyone glancing past her, exactly like what she was pretending to be, a night shift cleaner. A woman the world had permission to overlook. She was not supposed to be there. She was supposed to have been on a stage at Lincoln Center by now, in a black velvet gown, singing Puccini for an audience of 2,000. That had been the plan when she was 21, when she had held a Juilliard scholarship worth $68,000 a year, and a future so bright her father, a small-time Brooklyn baker named Gino Marchetti, had cried at every one of her recitals until his handkerchief was translucent. Then Gino had dropped dead in his flour-dusted apron on a Wednesday morning behind the counter of his shop on Court Street, and the future had died with him. The debts had come first, then the funeral, then her 12-year-old sister Sophia's diagnosis of type 1 diabetes 6 months later, then the eviction from the apartment above the bakery, then the cascading collapse of everything Elena had ever believed she was. She had stopped singing that year. Not slowly, not gradually, completely, the way a light switch is flipped. The last note she had sung in public was Vici d'arte from Puccini's Tosca, standing beside her father's open casket at Our Lady of Peace in Carroll Gardens. Her voice had cracked on the final phrase, and she had walked away from the pulpit and never sung another note where another human being could hear her. Music, she had decided in that pew, was a thing you loved that eventually killed the people who loved you back for loving it. She would not risk it again. Now, 6 years later, she cleaned the mansions of men whose names appeared in whispered sentences behind closed doors. $47,000 in her sister's medical debt. 3 months behind on rent in a Queens walk-up that smelled of cabbage and mildew. $14 in her checking account. An eviction notice taped to the door of the apartment where 15-year-old Sophia was probably right now, injecting her nightly insulin dose with hands that trembled from low blood sugar because Elena had not been able to afford proper groceries in 2 weeks. This was the arithmetic of Elena Marchetti's life, and it was the arithmetic that had driven her, 1 year ago, to answer a discreet ad for night shift cleaning staff at the Colombo estate at $15 an hour cash under the table. She had known who the Colombos were. Every Italian kid from Brooklyn knew who the Colombos were. But she had also known that $15 an hour was more than she could make anywhere else, and that men like the Colombos rarely noticed the women who scrubbed their floors. She had been right about the first thing. She was about to be catastrophically wrong about the second. 3 days earlier, in the estate service kitchen at 4 in the afternoon, Camilla Rossi had cornered her in front of 40 other members of the household staff. Camilla was 32, 6 feet tall in her Louboutins, a former elite model management runway girl who had married her way into proximity with power by getting briefly engaged to a mid-level Colombo capo before he was killed in a rival hit 2 years back. Now she ran the estate's household operations with the icy precision of a woman who had traded her looks for authority and intended to extract interest on the exchange. She wore a cream Max Mara suit that afternoon, her platinum-dyed hair swept into a chignon that had cost $300 at a Fifth Avenue salon, and she held a leather clipboard against her sternum like a shield. "Elena, darling," Camilla had said, her voice sweet enough to draw wasps. "We've had complaints. Two of the visiting Sicilian consiglieres who came for dinner last Sunday said that seeing you carry the dessert tray, and I quote, ruined their appetite. So from now on, you clean at night. After everyone has gone to bed. We don't need the Colombo estate looking like a Weight Watchers meeting. The kitchen had gone dead silent. Elena had felt her face burn from her collarbones to her hairline. She had heard distantly one of the younger maids, a girl named Ashley, who was 19 and terrified of Camilla, let out a small nervous laugh, the kind you let out when you are begging the predator not to look at you next. Elena had said nothing. She had looked at the floor, counted the veins in the marble, and nodded once. But Camilla had not been finished. Camilla had walked around the prep counter, reached up, and yanked the tortoiseshell pin from Elena's bun. Elena's hair had tumbled down her back in a heavy dark wave that reached almost to her waist. It was the one thing she had left of her mother, who had died when Elena was 6. Her mother's hair. Her mother's exact shade. Her mother's exact weight and thickness. Camilla had run one manicured finger through the length of it, as if inspecting merchandise, and let it fall. And do something about this, Camilla had said. You look like a peasant from Naples. Elena had picked up her mop bucket, and she had walked out of the kitchen without a single word, and she had not cried until she was locked inside the service bathroom 2 floors up. Even then she had cried quietly into the sleeve of her uniform, because Elena Marchetti had learned young that a woman who makes noise when she is hurt only teaches the world where to hit her next time. That had been 3 days ago, and now, at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, she was alone in the East Wing ballroom, scrubbing a red wine stain out of the marble, where one of the visiting Sicilian consiglieres, perhaps the very one whose appetite she had ruined, had dropped his glass during a Sunday meeting. The stain had set. She had been on her hands and knees for 40 minutes, and her back was screaming, and her lower spine felt like it had a hot coal lodged between the vertebrae, and she was so tired that the loneliness had stopped being a feeling and had become, instead, a kind of weather, a fog she moved through without noticing anymore. The ballroom itself was one of the most acoustically perfect rooms in the state of New York. It had been designed in 1904 by the same architect who had consulted on the rehearsal hall at La Scala in Milan. The ceiling was frescoed with scenes from the Aeneid. The chandelier held 4,200 hand-cut baccarat crystals, each one hanging from a filament of Belgian silk. The floor was Carrara. The walls were paneled in silk damask the color of oxblood. It was a room designed to catch sound the way a cathedral catches prayer, to lift it, to hold it, to give it back to the singer amplified and forgiven. Elena did not know any of this consciously. She only knew that the room felt, tonight, like a cave that wanted her to fill it. And so, without meaning to, without deciding to, without any conscious permission from the part of her that had spent 6 years standing guard at the door of her own throat, she began to hum. The tune came out first, a bare thread of it, barely more than an exhale with pitch. Vici di arte, vici d'amore. I lived for art. I lived for love. It was Tosca's second act aria, the moment when the doomed opera singer kneels alone and asks God why he has abandoned her. It was her father's favorite. It was the last thing she had sung in public. It was the song that had been sitting behind her sternum for 6 years, like a knife she was too afraid to remove. The hum thickened. She did not stop scrubbing. She sang the first line under her breath, then the second. And by the 4th line she was no longer scrubbing. She was sitting back on her heels with a sponge forgotten in her lap, and her voice, cracked in places, dusty from disuse. But underneath the rust, still the voice that had made a 60-year-old Juilliard vocal coach weep in a practice room in 2018, was rising into the 4,200 crystals of the chandelier above her. She sang the whole aria. She did not know she was going to. She sang it broken, imperfect, human. She missed a high note and did not care. And when she reached the final line, perch, signore, perch me, any remuneri così, her voice cracked exactly the way it had cracked at her father's funeral, in the exact same place, on the exact same syllable, and she sat back on the cold marble floor of a Mafia boss's ballroom, and she cried without sound for a father who had been dead for 6 years, and a life she had buried with him. And then, from the shadowed archway behind her, she heard the soft, unmistakable click of an expensive shoe on marble. Elena's blood stopped moving. She turned very slowly, still on her knees, and looked toward the archway that led into the ballroom from the private conservatory. A man was standing there. He was tall. She could tell that even from 20 feet away, in the low light, and he was wearing a charcoal Brioni suit that had been tailored to fit a body built by someone who took the word body seriously. His tie was loosened. His hands were in his pockets. His face was in shadow. But she knew who he was. Every person who had ever worked in this house knew who he was, whether they had ever seen him or not, the way medieval peasants knew who lived in the castle on the hill, without ever having crossed the drawbridge. Matteo Colombo, 34 years old, head of the Colombo crime family, the most powerful of the 5 Mafia dynasties currently operating in the greater New York metropolitan area. A man who, according to a Vanity Fair profile that had been quietly killed before publication 2 years ago, controlled 73% of the private shipping traffic through the port of Newark and had personally attended the funerals of 3 men who had tried to move against him. A widower. His wife, Isabella, had been killed in a car bombing 18 months ago that had been meant for him. He had not been photographed smiling in public since. He was supposed to be in Palermo. His flight was not supposed to land until Thursday. Every member of the staff had been told this. Elena had counted on it. And yet, here he was, standing in the archway of his own ballroom at 11:47 at night, having heard her sing an aria she had not sung in 6 years, and she was on her knees on the floor with a mop bucket beside her and tears running down her face and her hair down her back like a peasant from Naples. She scrambled to stand. Her knees, stiff from 40 minutes on the marble, refused. She half rose, half stumbled, caught herself on the edge of the bucket, and knocked it sideways. Gray, soapy water spilled in a slow arc across the polished floor, toward the imported silk damask curtains at the window. Elena made a small, choked sound of horror. "Don't," the man in the archway said quietly. She froze. "Don't move," he said. His voice was low, rough at the edges. The voice of a man who had not spoken to anyone in several hours and had been thinking in another language before he opened his mouth. "Just don't move." Elena did not move. Her hair was in her face. Her uniform was soaked at the knees. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, so hard she thought he must be able to hear it from across the room. Matteo Colombo took one step out of the shadow, and then another, and the light from the chandelier caught his face for the first time. Elena had never seen him in person. She had seen him once in a grainy photograph on a news website that had been taken down within hours of its posting. In the photograph, he had looked handsome in the ordinary, dangerous way that men in expensive suits often look. In person, he looked like something else. His face was long, sharp at the jaw, softer at the mouth. His hair was black and starting to gray at the temples in a way that suggested the gray had arrived quickly and recently. A faded scar cut through his left eyebrow, a thin white line the width of a razor. His eyes were the color of dark honey held up to a candle, and they were fixed on her with an intensity she had never in her life had directed at her by another human being. He was not looking at her body. He was not looking at her uniform. He was looking at her mouth, as if he were trying to understand where the sound had come from and whether it might still be inside her. Before we go any further into what happens next in that ballroom, do me a small favor. If you're already feeling something in your chest right now, that tightness, that leaning forward feeling, hit that like button so more people who need this kind of story can find it. And subscribe if you haven't yet, because what Matteo Colombo does in the next 60 seconds is the moment that changes everything for Elena Marchetti forever. "Who taught you?" Matteo said and stopped. He cleared his throat. He tried again, in Italian this time, softly, almost to himself. "Ci ti hai insegnato a cantare così." Who taught you to sing like that? Elena's Italian was flawless. Her father had spoken to her in the Palermo dialect of his mother from the day she was born. She understood every syllable, but her mouth would not open. Matteo took another step forward. He stopped about 6 feet from her. He did not come closer. He seemed to understand, in the way that certain dangerous men understand certain things about frightened animals, that closing the distance would be a mistake. "You are shaking," he said. He had switched back to English. His accent, when he spoke English, was almost invisible. The accent of a man who had been educated by Jesuits and had negotiated in 4 languages before he was 25. I am not going to hurt you. I want you to hear me say that, and I want you to believe it. I am not going to hurt you. Elena found her voice. It came out as a whisper. I'm so sorry, Mr. Colombo. I thought the house was empty. I would never. The singing, I'll clean the water. Stop, he said. Not unkindly. Stop apologizing. Nobody who sings like that should apologize for anything. Elena's mouth closed. He studied her for a long moment. She could feel him cataloging details. The uniform 2 sizes too big at the shoulders, the wet knees, the loose hair, the bleach-cracked hands, the bucket on its side, the wine stain still unfinished on the floor. She braced herself for what always came next. The disgust, the polite dismissal, the instruction to leave through the servant's entrance and never return. Instead, Matteo Colombo did something that no member of his household staff, if they had witnessed it, would have believed for the rest of their lives. He walked over to her, and he lowered himself down onto the marble floor of his own ballroom. And he sat in a Brioni suit that cost $11,000, in a puddle of gray, soapy mop water, at eye level with a cleaning woman he had never spoken to before in his life. Sit, he said quietly. Please. My knees are worse than yours. Elena sat, because she did not know what else to do. She sat back on her heels, 6 feet from him, on a wet marble floor, at 11:52 at night, in a house that belonged to a man whose enemies did not tend to die of natural causes. That aria, he said. That was Vici d'arte. She nodded. My wife used to hum it, he said. His voice did not change. He said it the way another man might have said my wife used to take sugar in her coffee. In the kitchen. In the morning. She wasn't a singer. She just liked the melody. She was humming it the morning she got in the car. Elena's throat closed. I have not heard that aria since her funeral, Matteo said. 18 months. 549 days. I have been in 11 countries in that time, and I have gone to some extraordinary lengths, some very deliberate lengths, to make sure I never heard that particular piece of music again. And then I walked into my own house tonight and heard a woman I have never met sing it better than anyone I have ever heard sing it in my life. Elena's hands were trembling in her lap. She pressed them flat against her thighs to stop them. So I'm going to ask you again, Matteo said. And now his voice was very soft, very steady. The voice of a man asking a question, the answer to which was going to determine the shape of the rest of his life. Who taught you to sing like that? Elena opened her mouth. And for the first time in 6 years, standing in the ruins of her own dignity in front of the most dangerous man in New York, Elena Marchetti told the truth. My father, she whispered. My father taught me. And behind them, unheard by either of them, the door to the ballroom service corridor clicked softly shut, as a woman with a chignon and a Max Mara suit and a leather clipboard held against her sternum walked away down the dark hallway, with the beginnings of a very dangerous idea already forming behind her ice-cold eyes. If your heart is pounding right now, drop a single word in the comments. Just tell me, are you Team Elena, or are you already worried about what Camilla just overheard? I read every single comment. And the next part of the story is going to break something inside you that you didn't know was still whole. Elena did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her narrow twin bed in the Queen's walk-up, still in her uniform, and watched the digital clock on the microwave in the kitchenette turn from 3:17 to 3:18 to 3:19, and she replayed the sound of Matteo Colombo's voice saying nobody who sings like that should apologize for anything until the words lost their meaning and became a kind of music themselves. Sophia was asleep in the other twin bed, her insulin pump making its small mechanical whisper every few minutes, her 15-year-old face slack with a particular exhaustion of a chronically ill child who has learned to sleep through her own body. Elena watched her sister breathe and tried very hard not to think about the fact that a man who ordered other men killed had knelt in mop water in an $11,000 suit and asked her, softly, who had taught her to sing. She had not told him everything. She had told him her father's name. She had told him she had attended Juilliard for 3 years. She had not told him about the debts, about Sophia, about the eviction notice currently taped to the outside of her apartment door in a plastic sleeve because the building super was a coward who could not bring himself to knock. She had thought, walking out of that ballroom at 12:41 in the morning after Matteo Colombo had personally handed her a clean linen napkin from a sideboard to dry her hands, that she would probably never see him again. Men like that did not follow up. Men like that had accountants and lawyers and lieutenants to handle the follow-up, and the follow-up was usually a quiet firing and a non-disclosure agreement. She was wrong about that too. At 8:03 the following morning, while Elena was standing in her kitchenette measuring out 3 ounces of the cheap coffee she bought in bulk from the Turkish grocer on Steinway Street, someone knocked on her apartment door. Elena froze. Nobody knocked on her door in the morning. The super slid notices under it. The neighbors ignored her. She walked to the door in her bare feet, still in yesterday's uniform because she had not managed to change, and she looked through the peephole, and she saw a man in a black overcoat and black driving gloves holding a manila envelope. She opened the door 2 inches, on the chain. "Miss Marchetti," the man said. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, with a kind of face that gave away absolutely nothing. "My name is Salvatore Bonanno. I work for Mr. Colombo. He asked me to deliver this to you personally. I am not coming inside. You can take the envelope and close the door, and I will leave. Nothing about this requires anything from you." Elena took the envelope. It was heavier than it should have been. She closed the door. She did not open it right away. She stood with her back against the door for a full minute, breathing, and then she walked to the kitchenette table and sat down and slid her thumb under the flap. Inside were 3 things. The first was a bank statement, dated that morning, from Mount Sinai Hospital's patient accounts department, showing that Sophia Marchetti's outstanding balance of $47,218 had been paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. The second was a letter from her landlord, a copy, indicating that her account was now current through the following November. The third was a cream-colored card, thick as a communion wafer, with a phone number handwritten in black ink and a single line beneath it in the same hand. "When you are ready to sing again, not for me, for yourself, call this number. There is no expectation attached to it. MC." Elena put the card down on the table. She put her hands over her face. She did not cry, because Elena Marchetti did not cry when she was hurt, and she was learning, over the course of 36 hours, that she also did not cry when she was saved. She sat at her kitchenette table in her uniform, in her walk-up in Queens, next to a hospital statement that had erased the entire shape of her adult life, and she began, for the first time in 6 years, to laugh. Sophia stumbled out of the bedroom, rubbing her eyes. "Ellie, why are you laughing? Are you okay?" Elena looked up at her sister, 15 years old, alive, insured, safe, and she said very quietly, "Soph, something happened. I don't know what it is yet, but something happened." 3 days later, Camilla Rossi called an emergency all-staff meeting. She held it in the service kitchen at 4 in the afternoon, the same room, the same time of day, 40 members of the household staff arranged in the same rough half-circle around the same prep counter. Camilla wore the same cream Max Mara suit. She held the same leather clipboard against her sternum. And Elena, who had been summoned along with everyone else, stood at the back of the room in a fresh uniform with her hair in a bun and her hands folded in front of her, and she watched Camilla's face and understood, in the particular way a woman understands another woman who has decided to destroy her, that Camilla had heard something. Camilla had heard something in that ballroom on Tuesday night, and Camilla had spent the last 3 days deciding what to do about it. "There has been," Camilla said, her voice honey smooth, "a serious breach of protocol in this house. A member of the night staff was found 3 nights ago in an unauthorized area of the estate, engaging in behavior that constitutes gross professional misconduct. I have documentation. I have witness testimony. I have made my recommendation to Mr. Colombo's office, and I am now informing this staff that effective immediately, Elena Marchetti is terminated for cause and will be removed from the property within the hour." The kitchen went silent. 40 faces turned toward Elena. Elena did not move. She had known this was coming from the moment Camilla had opened her mouth. What she had not known, what she could not have known, was that at that exact moment, 6 feet behind Camilla, the service kitchen door had opened without a sound, and Matteo Colombo had walked into his own kitchen for the first time in the 4 years Camilla had worked for him. He was not alone. Salvatore Bonanno was 2 steps behind him. Nico, his cousin and enforcer, was 2 steps behind Salvatore. All 3 men were in charcoal suits. None of them were smiling. "Continue, Camilla," Matteo said quietly. "Please. I would like to hear the rest of this." Camilla turned. The color drained out of her face, so fast Elena watched it happen in real time. Watched the blood retreat from the woman's cheeks to somewhere lower and more essential. Watched Camilla's grip on the leather clipboard go white at the knuckles. Camilla opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She tried again. "Mr. Colombo, I was not expecting. I would have brought this to your office directly. I did not want to trouble you with." "You have my full attention now," Matteo said. He walked around the prep counter, unbuttoning his suit jacket with one hand, and he leaned against the counter opposite her, and he folded his arms. "Please. The witness testimony. The documentation. Elena Marchetti's unauthorized behavior. I would like to hear all of it. In front of the staff, since you have chosen to hold this conversation in front of the staff." Camilla's mouth opened and closed. She looked, for the first time in the 4 years anyone in that kitchen had known her, like exactly what she was, a former model who had traded her looks for authority, and was about to discover that the exchange did not include immunity. "Mr. Colombo," she tried, "perhaps in your office." "Here's fine," he said. And then, very softly, in a voice that made 2 of the younger maids at the back of the room instinctively take a step backward. "Camilla, I'm going to make this easy for you. 3 nights ago, at 11:47 in the evening, I returned to this house from Palermo 2 days ahead of my published schedule. I walked in through the conservatory. I heard a woman singing in the East Ballroom. I stayed to listen. I introduced myself. I spoke with her for approximately 45 minutes. She was cleaning a wine stain that one of your Sunday guests had left on the marble. She was doing her job. She was doing it at that hour because you had ordered her to work only at night, in the wing of the house furthest from human contact. Because 2 men whose names I know and whose futures in this organization I am currently reconsidering told you they did not enjoy looking at her at dinner." Camilla's clipboard slipped an inch in her hands. She caught it. "I have," Matteo said, "the audio recordings from the service kitchen surveillance system. All of them. I have listened to every conversation you have had in this room for the last 11 months. I have transcripts. I have timestamps. Would you like me to have Salvatore read the transcript of your comments to Miss Marchetti last Thursday afternoon aloud, in this kitchen, in front of these 40 people? Or would you prefer to resign quietly and walk to your car?" The silence in the kitchen was so complete that Elena could hear the second hand of the wall clock above the walk-in freezer. Tick, tick, tick. Camilla did not resign quietly. Camilla, to her credit, went down swinging. She lifted her chin, and she looked past Matteo. And she looked directly at Elena for the first time since Matteo had walked into the room. And she said, in a voice sharpened by 3 days of jealousy and something older and uglier than jealousy, "She is a fat little cleaning woman with a mop bucket, Matteo. She is not what you think she is. You are grieving. You heard a song your dead wife used to hum, and you have confused a peasant with a memory. In 6 months you will look at her across a dinner table, and you will not be able to remember what possessed you. If you're watching this and your jaw just dropped, hit the like button one more time, because what Matteo does next is the reason this channel exists. Every single time a woman gets underestimated in a story like this, someone in the room finally decides to stop letting it happen. Keep watching." Matteo did not raise his voice. He did not move away from the counter. He simply looked at Camilla for a long, unhurried moment. And then he said, "You are correct about one thing. I am grieving. I have been grieving for 18 months. And in 18 months of grieving, I have watched 42 women in this house do their jobs with dignity, and I have watched exactly one woman. You use my grief as cover to build a small empire of cruelty in a kitchen you do not own. So let me tell you what is going to happen. You are going to walk out of this room. Salvatore is going to escort you to your office. You are going to hand him your keys, your access cards, your estate phone, and the leather clipboard, which is company property. You are going to sign the non-disclosure agreement he places in front of you, which will be generous, because I am not a cruel man, and because your late fiancé served this family loyally. And then you're going to leave this property. And you're going to understand for the rest of your life that the reason no door in this city will open for you again is not because I closed them. It is because you cut a woman down, because you thought no one important was watching. Everyone important was watching, Camilla. Everyone important is always watching. That is the part you never understood. Camilla stared at him. She stared at him for a full 5 seconds. And then, without another word, she turned, and she walked out of the kitchen with Salvatore 2 steps behind her, and Elena watched her go. And Elena did not feel triumph, and she did not feel vindication, and she did not feel anything she had expected to feel. She felt only the small, quiet, terrible sadness of watching a woman destroyed by exactly the weapon that woman had spent her whole life sharpening. Matteo turned to the remaining 39 members of his staff. I owe all of you an apology, he said. I have not been present in this house. I have not been present in my own life. That changes today. Elena Marchetti is not terminated. Elena Marchetti is not a member of the cleaning staff, effective this afternoon. Elena Marchetti has accepted a position, if she wants it, as artist-in-residence at this estate, with a private studio in the North Conservatory and a full scholarship for her return to Juilliard, which begins in January. I have arranged this quietly over the last 72 hours. She does not know about any of it. I am telling all of you now, because I would like her, from this moment forward, to be treated as what she is, which is a guest of this house, not a member of its staff. Is that understood? 39 heads nodded at once. Matteo turned toward the back of the room. Elena had not moved. Her hands were still folded in front of her. Her face had gone very still, the way faces go still when they have been asked to absorb more information than a nervous system can process in real time. Elena, Matteo said quietly, would you come with me, please? She followed him out of the kitchen, down a corridor she had cleaned 200 times, into the North Conservatory, which was a glass-walled room full of orchids and a 9-foot Steinway grand piano that had not been played, according to house lore, since Matteo's father had died. Matteo closed the door behind them. The two of them stood alone in a room full of green light and the smell of gardenias. You had no right, Elena said. Her voice was shaking. She had not planned to say it. It came out of her the way the aria had come out of her, without permission. You had no right to arrange any of this without asking me. I have a sister. I have a life. I have, Mr. Colombo, I have not been on a stage in 6 years. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what it does to a voice? You cannot decide the shape of my life for me, because you heard me sing a song your wife used to hum. I am not her. I am not a replacement. I am not a memorial. Matteo listened to her without interrupting. When she stopped, he waited a full beat to make sure she was finished, and then he said, you are right. About all of it. I am sorry. Elena's breath caught. I did not arrange these things to replace anyone, he said. I arranged them because when a person hears something as rare as what I heard 3 nights ago, and then discovers that the person who made that sound is being buried alive by the world, that person has a choice. They can pretend they did not hear it and go back to their life. Or they can move whatever needs to be moved to make sure that voice does not stay buried. I made my choice quickly because I am a man who makes choices quickly. I did not consult you because I did not want you to feel obligated to me, which is a distinction I understand may not have survived the way I actually executed it. If you want to walk out of this room right now and never speak to me again, I will make sure Sophia's care continues and your apartment remains paid through November. And you will never see me or hear from me again. Those things are done. They are not conditional. They were never conditional. That is what the card meant. Elena's eyes filled. She did not let the tears fall. Why, she said. Just tell me why. Really. Matteo was silent for a long time. He walked to the Steinway and rested one hand on the closed lid. He did not look at her when he finally answered. Because for 18 months, he said, I have been a man who runs an empire. I have not been a man. I have made every decision I was supposed to make. I have attended every meeting. I have buried my wife, and I have found the men who killed her, and I have handled them, and I have kept this family from splintering, and I have not once, in 549 days, felt anything that was not either rage or the absence of rage. And then 3 nights ago, I walked into my own ballroom, and I heard a woman I had never seen kneeling on my floor sing an aria she did not know I could hear. And for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, I was not the head of the Colombo family. I was a boy who used to play piano before his father made him stop, listening to something so beautiful that I remembered I had once wanted a completely different life. I am not confusing you with a memory, Elena. I am telling you that you are the first thing in 18 months that has reminded me I am still alive. That is not an obligation. That is not a debt. That is a report. The tears fell. Elena did not stop them. I don't know what to do with that, she whispered. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. You sing or you don't sing. You take the residency or you don't. You go back to Juilliard in January or you don't. Whatever you do, Sophia stays healthy. Whatever you do, your apartment stays paid. Whatever you do, no one in this city ever speaks to you the way Camilla Rossi spoke to you. Those things are done. What you do with the rest of your life is yours. Elena walked to the piano. She rested her hand on the closed lid, 6 inches from his. She looked up at him. His dark honey eyes were wet at the corners, and he was not hiding it, and she understood, standing there in a glass room full of orchids at 4:47 in the afternoon on the 7th of December, that this was a man who had not cried in 18 months, and was not going to cry now, but who had allowed her, for a fraction of a second, to see the place where the crying lived. Play something, she said quietly. He looked at her. You said you used to play, she said. Play something, and I'll sing. Matteo opened the lid of the Steinway. He sat down on the bench. His hands hovered over the keys, and for a moment Elena thought he was going to say he had forgotten, that it had been too long, that he could not. And then he played the opening bars of Panis Angelicus, softly, in the key of a major, the way it is supposed to be played, and Elena Marchetti opened her mouth in the North Conservatory of the Colombo estate at 4:49 in the afternoon on the 7th of December, and she began to sing. 6 months later, on a snowy evening in early June that turned into unexpected warmth by dusk, Elena stood on the stage of Alice Tully Hall at Lincoln Center in a floor-length gown of oxblood silk, the exact color of the damask in the East Ballroom, and she sang the aria Vici di Arte for 2,000 people, including her sister Sophia, healthy and radiant in the second row, and Matteo Colombo, seated in a private box, wearing a charcoal Brioni suit and a small, private, unguarded smile that no member of his family had seen on his face in 19 months. She hit every note. She did not crack on the last line. When the audience rose to its feet, she looked up at the private box, and Matteo touched 2 fingers to his chest, and Elena Marchetti, who had spent 6 years believing music was a thing you loved that killed the people who loved you, understood, finally, that sometimes music was also a thing you loved that brought people back from the dead. They were married the following autumn in the private chapel of the Colombo estate, in front of 40 guests, on a Tuesday at 11:47 in the morning. Sophia was the maid of honor. Salvatore Bonanno was the best man. The music was played by a 9-year-old boy from the Marchetti Foundation, a scholarship program Matteo had founded in Gino Marchetti's name, funded with $20 million laundered clean through legitimate philanthropy, which by then had already sent 42 children from Brooklyn to conservatories around the world. Camilla Rossi was, at that moment, working the register at a strip mall boutique in a suburb of Cleveland, and had recently begun telling her co-workers that she had once known someone famous. Elena did not wear a veil. She wore her mother's hair down, dark and heavy to her waist, exactly the way she had worn it the night a Mafia boss had knelt in mop water in an $11,000 suit and asked her, softly, who had taught her to sing. Her father had taught her, and her father, whatever heaven he was in, had finally been repaid. If this story made you feel something, if you cried, if you smiled, if you texted a friend halfway through, do me one last favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with the woman in your life who needs to hear that the quiet ones always win in the end. And subscribe to this channel, because next week's story is going to break your heart in the best possible way. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Elena's place the night Matteo Colombo walked into that ballroom? Would you have kept singing? Would you have run? I read every single comment, and I'll see you in the next one.